All right, let's take a look at another topic that I've mentioned a couple times before called methods. Methods are actually the special name that are given to functions when that function is a part of an object. When we first started talking about objects, I had mentioned that objects not only had attributes, the things that described them, the variables, but they also could have behaviors. Those behaviors take the form of functions, and when a function is a part of an object, as these are about to be, we actually call those functions methods. So in general, I would say that the word function and the word method are basically interchangeable. The only difference is that a method is a function that specifically belongs within an object. So to kind of start getting things set up here, what I want to do first of all is just create an object. We need to have some kind of object that we can then add methods to so that we can see how this works. So let's go back to an example that we've done before, and let's make a constructor function for a square, which I will try to spell right. For our square, let's say that every square has a side length and a color, kind of like we've done previously. But what I want to do is I want to set up the side length and color so that those two parameters are passed to the square constructor function as an object literal, which I'll just call values. So more or less kind of the way this is going to work, if I come down in my body here, scoot everything up a little bit so you can see it a bit better, I hope. How I'm basically going to want to be able to use this is I'm going to want to be able to create a square. Let's say we make a variable called S1. I'm going to want to be able to assign a new square to it. I can't seem to spell square today. And then I'm going to pass an object literal to it with properties, let's say called side, and we'll set the property side to a value of 200, and a property called color, which I will set to green initially here. So that's basically the way that I want to be able to create a square, passing this object literal with those two values to it. I would also, however, like to be able to create squares other ways. I would like for a square actually to be smart enough to be able to fill in some of its own default values. So say for example I create a square and I don't pass either of those two values, just an empty object literal. Or maybe I pass only the side parameter but no color. Or maybe I pass only the color parameter but no side. So basically all the different possible combinations there, I would like to be able to create squares any of those different ways. The way I have it all right now is each one of these different ways that I want to be able to create a square is going to be passed an object literal. That object literal then is what will be stored here in the values argument for the square constructor function. So more or less what I need to do here in the square constructor function is I need to find a way to assign a value to side and find a way to assign a value to color. Of course, the trick there is that sometimes side and color will be part of the values object literal. Sometimes one will be there, sometimes the other will be there, sometimes they will both be missing. So I need for my constructor function here to be a little bit intelligent about how it actually decides what value to assign to those two data members, to those two attributes. Data member is just another term for attribute, really, a variable inside an object. But anyway, there's a few different ways I could do this. The complicated way I could do it would be to do something like if values.side is not equal to 0, and then I could use my conditional operator. So if side is not equal to 0, then assign the value of side to this dot side. Otherwise, assign a default value of 100 or something like that. That would get a little bit complicated because even if side isn't 0, it still could be undefined, it still could be false, it still could be a number of other things. So instead of doing it this way, which is going to take a lot of work, what I'll use instead is the default operator, which we actually talked about a while back. What I'll say is if values.side has a value, then take it. If it has a true value, I guess we should say, take it. Otherwise, then assign the default value of 100 to the side. Now, if you remember the way the default operator, the double pipe here, the OR operator, it might be called, if you remember the way it works, basically what happens is that if this value can be evaluated to true, then it will go ahead and return that value. So whatever value this is what will end up being assigned to side. If the value in values.side, however, evaluates to false, if it's falsy, if it's 0 or undefined or an empty string or null or something along those lines, then it will instead return the second value here, 100. So I'm basically setting side up to take a side if it's given and otherwise to take a value of 100. I can then take and do basically the same thing with color. I'll say either take the color value, the color attribute of the values object, or take a default color of, let's say, black. We'll make black our default color. So that should, in a fairly simple way, be able to let us use all those different variations of squares, all these different ways that I wanted to be able to create squares down here, and hopefully have them all come up with some sensible values in them. Let's just kind of test it out a little bit. Let's do a document.writeLine for s2.side. Now, s2 is this one right here, where I didn't pass any information at all. So what should happen here is that since no information is passed when I ask for values.side in the constructor function, it should come back as undefined, which is falsy, so it'll take the value of 100 instead. So the output from this document.writeLine should end up being 100. Let's see if it is. Sure enough. So that worked just fine. So everything looks like it's going real well so far. Okay, and we've got a nice little object set up there, so we're ready to then start talking about adding methods, adding behaviors to our squares. Like I mentioned before, behaviors are basically just functions. So let's say, for example, that I wanted a behavior that would allow a square to print out its information, basically its side and its color. What I might do, kind of in the old-fashioned way, is maybe here I would create a function, call it show square, right? And then inside here I could maybe do something like do a document.writeLine. I'll have it print out a horizontal rule. Maybe I'll do two of those, one at the beginning and one at the end, and between them I think I'll have it print out side length followed by the actual value of side followed by a break. Excuse me. And then after that I'll do the same thing and have it print out the actual value of color. Something like this. Okay? So if I was just going to do this as a regular old function, this is more or less what that function would look like. The only problem with this function right now is that it doesn't know what square it's supposed to be printing out the values for. Right now I have it just printing out generically a side variable and a color variable, but if you think about it, those two variables don't really exist anywhere except inside a square. So there's a couple of different options here. One is that I could actually pass a square as an argument to this function and then reference that object to be able to get the values out of it when I print out side and color. But something I could do that would be a little bit more streamlined then would be to take this function and actually make it a part of every square. So every square object that's created would have stored inside it, along with its side and its color, the ability to be able to show, basically to do document.writelines of its side and its color. So every square would more or less be sort of self-printable in a way, if you want to think about it that way. Okay. The way I need to do this is I need to actually take my show square function and I need to attach it to my show square constructor function so that the show square function becomes a part of every new square that's actually created. And the way I do that is inside my square constructor function I'm going to tell it that I want to create a new variable called show, and what I want to assign to it is the show square function. So this line, this statement, is actually going to take the show square function itself, which I've written up above there, and it's going to assign the entire function here to the show variable. So basically it's like when we were talking about functions, and I mentioned that there were two different ways they could be created. Sort of the traditional way that always started with the keyword function and then was followed by a name, but there was also that alternative way where we simply create sort of an anonymous function, a function with no name, and we stick it straight into a variable. Here that's more or less what we're doing, is we're just taking a function that exists, kind of think of the function as being just data, and we're assigning it here to a variable called show. So whenever I access the show attribute of square, of a square, what I'll actually be doing is accessing the show square function itself. The way this would be called, and by the way, this isn't going to work here for just a second, there is one other change that's going to be made, but the way this would basically work is I would call s1.show. Okay. Here I've included the parentheses. That tells it to execute the function. What function it's going to execute is the function that it finds inside the attribute called show. The attribute called show has in it the show square function, so that's the function that will actually execute, is my function up here that actually prints out the attributes of the square. Now I mentioned if I try to run this now, it doesn't work. You can see I just get the horizontal rule and then everything quits. The reason it's not working right now is up here in the show square function, it still needs to know where is side and where is color. It's still looking for just two general variables with those names that don't exist. Side and color only exist inside an object. Now the side and the color variables that I want this function to actually execute are located inside the same object that the function itself is located in. So what I can do is I can preface both of those two variables with this. So if I call show, the show square function basically, for square S1, it's going to access square S1's side, this object's side, and square S1's color, this dot color. So we'll actually end up with those values for that particular square being the ones that are printed. And if I look at it in my browser now, there we go, 200 in green, 200 in green, those are the values that I have assigned to S1. If I try it out for some of my others, S2 comes up as 100 and black. S2 was the object that had no initial values put into it, so it took the defaults of 100 for the side and black for the color. Try it again for S3. I get 200 in black. S3 indeed did set the side length to 200, but didn't set a color, so it got the default black. And if I do S4, right, S4 only sets the color of green, so it should get green for the color, and it should get the default side of 100. 100 in green. Yep, there we go. So that seems to work out just fine. And now we're printing all of this. You can see quickly and easily once that method is created, okay, just by calling the show function. That was so much fun. Let's go on and create another method to add to this this particular object, this square object. So we already have our show square function that prints out sort of the text-based version of the square. Let's do like we did in the previous square example and set it up so that we can actually, using CSS, draw some squares with a method that we'll add to the object. So this time I'm going to create another function. I'm going to call it draw square. Oops. There we go. All right. And basically what I want here is I want to put in some HTML that looks essentially like this, where I then fill in the actual CSS attributes dynamically so that I can get a square of the appropriate side length and the appropriate background color. But of course this is HTML, so I can't have this by itself here inside my JavaScript. What I really need to do is I need to have document.writelines that actually output this so that it becomes a part of the document itself. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just put that in sort of as a comment to kind of remember it as a guide. And let me take that and turn it into a bunch of document writelines. Essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off with div space style equals, and I want to put a double quote there. That's what HTML wants, but that means I can't have double quotes around the outside of my string or they'll sort of mess each other up a little bit. So I'm going to change the quotes around the outside of my string here to single quotes. That way I can have the double quotes inside and have them treated just as regular characters. So that's how I'm going to start this off, and I'm going to end it with document.writeline. Let's see, I need the closing quote, that one. I need the closing angle bracket, and then I need the closing div tag. So in the first document writeline, I basically have everything from here to there, the part that's highlighted there, and then in the closing document.writeline I have all the rest of that, which means any document.writelines I do in between those two then will basically be filled there inside the quotes where the CSS properties go. So let's have it fill some stuff in here. Let's do margin is 10 pixels. I'm going to do that just for readability basically, so when our squares actually display, they'll be separated from everything else a little bit, look a little bit nicer. Let's do a document.writeLine, and let's do width. For the width, I'm going to append in this.side. That's then going to be followed by a semicolon. This.side, because of course, remember, we're going to be calling drawSquare as a method of the square object. So when we refer to this.side, that means we're talking specifically about the side of whichever square we're calling the method for. Then let's do, well, as a matter of fact, let's copy and paste this line, because the next one we want, the height, is almost exactly the same. It still uses the value of side. And then let's do one more for background color. And it helps if you spell that correctly. There you go, background color. And for this one, we'll use this dot color. So we'll get the color of whichever square we've called this method on. There, something along those lines. We'll see if it works here in a second. Let's go ahead and attach that particular function to our square constructor function so that it becomes a method. Let's call it draw. So I'll say, whenever I ask for draw for a square, where it should get that value, where it should get that behavior, is from calling the drawSquare function. So there we go. Hopefully that gets everything rigged up. Let's see if it works then. Let me come back down here to the script tags that are inside my body, and let me try doing s1.draw. Take a look at it in the browser. Uh-oh, and it certainly didn't work. Now, what has gone wrong? In this case, what I might want to do is try and see if the method is actually being called the way it should. So let me come back up here to my draw function, my drawSquare function, and let me just put in an alert to see if that pops up. I'll just put in alert draw function there. That way, if the alert pops up, we'll know that it's calling the function, and there's probably at that point something wrong with the HTML or the CSS. Oh, as a matter of fact, same exact mistake I made before. I forgot to put in pixels here. Let's go ahead and try that anyway and just see what happens. Yep, draw function's being called, and that was the only problem. I figured it out while I was trying to figure it out. That happens sometimes. So anyway, we end up with our S1 square being drawn, so it has a pixel length on each side of 200, and it is green, just as it should be, so that looks okay. Let's go ahead and try it out on our other squares then. S2.draw. S2 is sort of our default square, which should have 100 for the side length and black for the background color. Yep, there it is. S3.draw. Okay. S3 should have a side length of 200 but have the default background color, so it should be 200 by 200 in black. There it is. And then the last one, S4.draw. Right, so S4 should have a green background color but the default side length, so 100 by 100 in green, and there it is. So I've got all of my squares showing up in my browser being drawn, and hopefully you can see the benefit of using these methods. Basically that benefit is that instead of me having to write this code many times, and it's not the prettiest code or the easiest to write in the world. I've messed it up now both times I've tried doing it. But instead of having to write that 4 times to print out 4 squares or to draw 4 squares, instead I can write it as just one function, add that function to the squares themselves, and then as many squares as I happen to have, I can just ask each one to draw themselves quickly and easily. So it really kind of comes down to what functions are all about. And objects too, in that we can kind of set everything up one time and then use it virtually an infinite number of times with very little extra work actually being required. So very useful stuff, and we'll run into this very often in JavaScript.